part of what makes my practice interesting is that I wake up and after 20 years of doing this, I'm still doing something new that I don't
Hmm.
necessarily know about. I still
You
have to,
get to do something new.
yeah,
Not you get to, you have to.
I have to. I'm adopting AI. I love AI. I think it's a phenomenal tool and I think we should all embrace it. But that's not the initial reaction. It's like, oh, it's going to replace, whatever. It's going to replace my
Right.
role as an attorney. I don't think that will ever happen. You're just going to evolve and that's going to change. And
Welcome back to the EsquireX Files podcast, where we sit with the best and the brightest legal and business minds, our leaders, where we discuss their victories, their lessons, and really talk about topics where legal meets business. Esquire itself is the nation's fastest growing legal freelancer marketplace. It's a digital platform connecting lawyers to work directly with other lawyers to grow their businesses, their careers alike in an innovative, scalable, efficient manner, basically just defying the confines of the traditional law firm structure. And today, we're very happy to have a chance to talk with Dahlia Saper. She is the principal attorney and founder of Saper Law, located in Chicago, based in Chicago. It's an award-winning law firm specializing in intellectual property, tech and social media issues as a whole, plus entertainment and business law. Did I get that right?
perfect. Exactly right.
Beautiful. She is also routinely in the national headlines, right in the spotlight, discussing forefront of cutting edge legal issues, mostly where technology meets culture and all the changing and shifting issues around it. So kind of in a really cool spot to be. And she's constantly interviewed by news outlets on the regular because these issues pop up, and we're happy to have a chance to talk about them.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Beautiful. So we're really happy to have you. You've got a really interesting intersection of practice areas. I just want to kind of start there rather than, we'll get to kind of like your story, but I just want to start with that because we just, touched on it. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of how'd you get that confluence of practice areas? What's the story, the genesis of, did you choose them? Was there some organic pathway of that kind of work coming your way? How did you select and choose that intersection?
Well, first and foremost, I consider myself to be an entrepreneur because if I wasn't going to be a lawyer, I wanted to own something. And so the next best option when I was launching my career was how can I be A, cool by association, and B, kind of be working alongside other entrepreneurs and to see how they grow and build their businesses.
So it was
I
almost
was,
entrepreneur first. Legal was sort of the back door
yeah,
for that, rather than I'm a lawyer. Let me figure out what kind of lawyer to be.
correct. So in law school, I partnered up with a friend who had a fashion production company, and I'd like to tell the story. It was back when The Apprentice was a quite popular reality
Uh
TV show.
huh.
So this concept of running your own thing was exciting to me, and so that was my first business with my friend. We ran it in law school, but when law school ended, I had to use the law degree I'd earned. And so the next best option was to marry my experience with PR and marketing, which was my undergrad major, business administration, with my love of all things the arts.
Mm.
And the best way to have a practice like that in Chicago was to start your own. And I had graduated a year early from undergrad, which meant I was a year out of law school a little bit early. So I had a little bit of time to play with. And so I figured I don't really have much to lose if I start this firm and see where it
Hmm.
takes me.
Now,
And
so
so as
was starting your firm the first really major move outside of law school then?
Yes. So I worked for a boutique firm for 6 months and then got enough kind of exposure to see the mechanics. Certainly, you need to
Hmm.
practice law to be good at it. But it was enough for me to feel comfortable saying, I can probably run some small scale version of this operation. And so
Hmm.
I got on Craigslist and bartered my way through my first year of practice. I found a lawsuit involving a web developer who provided me my first website. Um, and cases like that followed. And I've met a musician who needed me to assist with his licensing deals. And being 24 or 5 when I got out of law school meant that I was kind of appealing to other tech entrepreneurs, people who had a command of the online world, which in
Hmm.
2005 wasn't as developed as it is in 2025. And so I started going to film events, tech events, art events, anything that kind of intersected with the areas of IP, business, media, and the internet, and created very
Interesting.
organically and slowly a really unique and interesting client base. Uh,
Wow. So, in other words, you almost bootstrapped by trading your legal services for some of
yes,
the vendor services that you would require to build and grow your firm. So
yes.
instead of just paying out hard outlay of cash, you're brokering, kind of bartering your services for theirs, and that sort of almost created a model of that community of just kind of getting more people like that, albeit probably graduating to charging money this time
Right.
for your legal
Now I have a
services
real law
themselves.
firm with real fees. But
Right.
in the early years, I was also in the fashion scene, which I am part of now, but I would barter for clothes.
Mm,
I have a contact lens company that I would barter for contact lenses. And so there's a lot of that. And then once you get within the community, people know you and you get referred. And a lot of my firm was built on that word of mouth within the industries that I now practice.
outstanding.
And and at the same time, social media started to become more prevalent. When I first started my firm, we were talking MySpace and
Right. I was going to just say, to put it in context, what year was this? When did you graduate law school? What?
2004, and I started my firm
Okay.
in 2005. And then
Uh-huh.
Facebook had just become open to the non-college student. And
Wow.
I found myself being invited to international conferences to talk about this thing called Facebook that these kids were using and what
Right.
was it. And so,
So really,
yeah.
just as you were new to the practice of law and having a firm was when social media was just kind of getting off the ground as a thing. I mean, yeah, when you say MySpace, we're going back to the OG platforms here,
Correct.
and Facebook. I remember, distinctly, figuring out what Facebook was in law school, and seeing kind of kids on it for the first time as like, well, what is that? What are you playing with over there? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can understand that the time space we're talking about here. That's interesting though, because it's such a when things are that new, there's many different ways to look at it. You can look at it as this is a new front. This is the new kind of battleground. There's new issues. But a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be in as risk taking of a maverick of a situation to look at that as a practice area.
Well, I had nothing to lose, and also I was no less equipped to handle a case involving a domain name dispute or an
Hmm.
online defamation issue or the mechanics of marketing on a Facebook platform than the most seasoned partner at the biggest law firm. And in fact, when I
True.
was on these panels, I was often with these partners at these big law firms who may have a handle of the disputes academically, but none of them were actively using Facebook. I mean, I keep using
I
Facebook
see.
because that's what it was when I started. We're
Interesting.
not academic. They might have been academically able to handle it, but so much of the nuance and legal issues that arise on social media requires a baseline understanding of how that platform works, how it's actually used in practice. And again, being a 20-something-year-old, that was kind of in my wheelhouse, just intuitively and
Sure.
part of my, day-to-day living. And that was where I had more credibility than even the more, the 20-year veteran or whatever from a bigger firm.
Right. So you have that sort of generational one up at the time. And you also had almost the newness of it, the novelty of it almost functions as a force equalizer where you can go against the
Absolutely.
guy with the big guns and he's got, the infrastructure of a large dominant firm, 20, 30, 40 years, practicing, an army of lawyers, and you're saying, all right, that's nice, but this is new. None of you got, we're
Right.
all
I mean,
guinea pigs here.
exactly. I was in front of the judge arguing what context meant for a blog, a web blog, and explaining that it's not really defamation, for example, if it's on someone's personal blog page, because no one believes it to be a news source, and those kinds,
Hmm.
or no, what is a Facebook post and why is it damaging? Like those are things you have to explain to judges who are, we're still using carbon paper in our state court,
Right.
right? Like
Right,
that's
and
happening
there's
too.
technical settings. Not that, as time evolves, the complexity of the settings and the public perception of the usage, like you said, what do people deem it to be, changes and variates. A personal page versus a public page, and
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, and I guess as things evolved, as you evolved, your career, your own experience, you almost could sort of develop that specialty contemporaneously with the complexity of the tech features, as well as the public's use and perception of it, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you do one of these cases, we're like, oh, Dahlia knows that stuff. So it's a very small niche, and we dealt with recording industry Napster cases. Then we dealt with BitTorrent cases involving the sharing of pornography, and there was copyright infringement
Hmm.
suits involving the BitTorrent protocol. Then it was revenge porn and laws that were being passed only in the last few years to govern that kind of conduct that would have never
Right.
been a thing, 20 years ago.
How strong would you feel that you are from a purely technical perspective? In other words, some people sort of have that, left brain, right brain dichotomy, the people communicative side versus the sort of math sciences. And a lot of lawyers brag about how their math skills stink, or, and then, I couldn't look at a spreadsheet, but I can use them as exhibits in courts. And, so that side of understanding how the public relates to a platform is one thing, kind of more people oriented. The other part, as far as getting into the weeds on the technical aspects, do you feel that you rely a lot on subject matter experts, or do you sort of feel sort of innately, comfortable with some of those sort of more tech geeky
Well, no,
details,
I'm
if
by
you
no
will?
means a technical person, but the majority of my cases don't require, I'm not a patent attorney, so the
Right.
majority of my cases don't require really a strong technical understanding. To the extent they might, of course, I would bring in experts. But
Hmm.
the reality is the majority of these cases are very simple, right? That may
Right.
be complex because of the fact patterns, the number of characters, and the
Right.
details. But at the end of the day, a trademark case is about consumer confusion. A copyright
Hmm.
case is about access and substantial similarity. A
Right.
defamation case is, was it true or not true? I mean, so you can distill them down to very basic issues, and that's part of the skill set of being able to discern what we're really in court for versus
Right.
the noise. But anyone who's interested in this practice area does not need a very technical background. You should have some baseline understanding of like finance and understand what
Hmm.
the pros and cons of proceeding with the case and what it might cost and what your
Right.
next best opportunity is. But that's just lawyering 101, I would hope.
Sure.
So I would say no, it's not the technical importance. It's more of the handling of the real world practical application of these different mediums that might
Hmm.
be in play in these different cases.
Well, that's a pretty friendly message you put forth as far as don't be intimidated by that, because I think there are a lot of lawyers, especially as they have, just with experience, a little bit of age, they're middle aged or perhaps a little older, even a little more, a little more of a veteran community, if you will. And I think
Hmm.
they do get intimidated. I mean, I remember even as recently as the beginning of the COVID lockdowns, as courthouses were getting closed, a lot
Yeah,
of attorneys were very upset about having to figure out how to get on a Zoom call, and irate, and even bringing up issues as far as access to clients and justice and the right to an attorney, and what if that attorney's you're basically barring him from the courtroom by making him get on a Zoom call. These very sort of dinosaur like complaints. So when you get into, just imagine something like that, let alone, let's just say a crowd like that getting into a CLE where
right.
it's how does the, sort of certain, social media platforms affect the ethics of law, for example. And, they're kind of coming out of there feeling, oh my God, my head's swimming. This is the stuff I need to ask my kids about. And, you're basically saying, listen, just, don't put your automatic blinders onto it just because it's involving a computer.
Exactly.
you know, revert to your roots and just understand the issues involved and learn about it like you would anything else in a foreign environment. If you get a case involving, a products liability case in a
Right.
warehouse, you don't have to be, a steel worker to understand that. You kind of figure out the landscape and apply your thinking cap to it.
Right. Because oftentimes you're explaining this to a non-expert as well, a judge or a jury who's not familiar with the particular industry or the law.
Hmm. No, so that's and anyone listening, don't be intimidated automatically. Now, as the years ensued, and at this point, decades, a couple decades now, how have you seen your command of this practice area sort of change and evolve as those two things, both the technology itself, the platforms, as well as the public sort of usage slash perception of them, and how it's gotten integrated into our culture?
Well,
How
what a
has your
great,
practice changed?
yeah, great segue into AI, right? So the tech issue du jour is AI. How does that impact copyright ownership of material? What about privacy? What about AI outputting defamatory information about an individual? Like, what if ChatGPT gets it wrong? And so, like all the other things that came before it, whether it was revenge porn as a statute or a concept, or again, can you trademark a hashtag that's posted on a social media platform, or the FTC guy? I mean, it's all interesting and new, but we have a baseline understanding of copyright law. We're able to understand and discern the nuances as, as the Copyright Office might issue opinions, or as different cases go through the courts, and advise our clients accordingly. I mean, a lot of that means you have to be up to date. You're not just doing the same old, I don't know. I don't want to disparage any other area of law, but that's
Sure.
part of what makes my practice interesting, is that I wake up and after 20 years of doing this, I'm still doing something new that I don't necessarily know about. I still
You
have
get to do something new.
Yeah.
Not you get to, you have to.
I have to. I'm adopting AI. I love AI. I think it's a phenomenal tool, and I think we should all embrace it. But that's not the initial reaction. It's like, oh, it's going to replace, whatever. It's going to replace my
Right.
role as an attorney. I don't think that will ever happen. You're just going to evolve, and that's going to change. And again, the law will adapt, and we get to be on the forefront of that as a firm and as a practice.
Right. So, for example, I'll throw out the example in a second, but I'll ask the question first. Have you seen the law itself? As you said, we apply case law, we apply precedent, which largely is coming from the past. We apply principles and, models of analyses to current facts. Do you feel that sometimes the law can be, I'll even just insert the word frustratingly, behind its ability to sort of apply and adapt? And if you do apply sort of doctrines, premises, you almost come up with an absurd result based on its intersection with, come on, really? That's the result when we're looking at it here? And the example I'll use for that was how people, one of the most recent issues I've seen on that was sort of an AI generated trademark. And that the patent, the ability to register that trademark wasn't necessarily created uniquely and authentically by a human. And now we get into issues such as that. So then, of course, it gets into how much individual stylization is required from that.
Yep.
And obviously, we're going to use AI in some capacity as the source, as the root of almost anything, even legal documents that then a human perhaps needs to modify and tweak and massage a bit and develop.
Yep.
But then we get into that question of how much. And without getting bogged down in that legal issue, you might get this absurd result where somebody takes something that is just abundantly used and considered maybe okay or commonplace or sort of pop culture, and then the law comes along and says, oh no, and you almost get this anachronistic result. So again, without applying that to the example, I just kind of use that to illustrate my question. Do you see that happening a lot, where you get almost an anachronistic result when applying old law to new tech and new culture?
Of course. And you're always trying to advocate and hope that legislation catches up. The copyright example you gave is one. Like, what is the line between the robot making the creative work versus the individual? And then we take it back to its roots. If you had hired a human to help you develop something, to what extent did you direct that human? And what is if you just said, make me a sunflower, but didn't illustrate it or draw it or really input any creative, give any creative suggestions, then the existing law says the person who created it is the owner, unless you have a contractual agreement in place. In this case, the person who created it is a computer. The computer is not a human. And then they refer to like a case involving a monkey who took a photo, the monkey selfie case. I can talk to you about that another time. But in the monkey selfie case, the people for the ethical treatment of animals sued and said the monkey deserves the royalties, namely us, for the selfie photos the monkey took. And the court said monkey's not a human, so it becomes open source. It becomes open, public domain, not the right word.
Okay.
At any rate, so you'd be surprised. We do try to. The courts do their best, and when you need to fill in the gaps, that's where you have advocacy for new laws like the deep fake laws that say it should be illegal to use AI to mimic someone's celebrity or voice to sell or create something, because the right of publicity laws already cover it. But let's be clear, using a deep fake or an AI tool should be illegal,
Right. So let me ask you this. On that, this is a perfect segue to another question I have, which is, it's one thing to litigate the current issues, and it's one thing to apply them to the current scuffle. And then from that, as you've just alluded to, oftentimes the result of that, especially if it's a bit of an absurd result, motivates and sort of elucidates first and then motivates the need for change on a legislative level to
Yes,
solve the, hey, listen, great point. We're applying the law. You know what the solution is we need a new law. We need to change the law.
absolutely.
Have you been involved, or have you been sort of even either sourced as almost an expert, or because you're seeing it on the battle lines, or kind of contributing to a think tank, or in any kind of legislative contributory fashion other than just shaping law from a stare decisis
No,
perspective?
I mean, sometimes, yes, different organizations, especially like with the most recent deepfake one I referenced, I'll get asked, hey, do you have any clients who would be good examples
Hmm.
for this case when the revenge porn clients, when the revenge porn statutes were trying to be crafted, I was reached out by media reached out to me. Can you tell us more about the impact of the dissemination of this in non-consensual
Right.
pornography? So while I haven't been, I don't have a direct role. I'm by no means a lobbyist or directly lobbyist, yeah, or directly involved in the legislative process. From time to time, my database of clients have been, solicited, let's say,
Sure.
to provide testimony or input on how that law might be shaped.
Right. It's a fascinating place to be because every lawyer has their war stories that they say at the bar association or at lunch.
Yeah.
Your war stories are perhaps a very I'm sure they go back, but I know the recent ones are the
Yes.
most highly relevant, that are literally in the crosshairs of potential change that needs to happen now. And it's not just some old distant war story. It's saying, hey, listen, I'm going to go to Dahlia and say, what are the stories we need to sort of
I mean, I
integrate
tell
these
you,
case
like,
studies
like
on?
forget guns. Like the most damaging weapons right now are bad Instagram posts. Like I'm getting so many calls involving some sort of negative online statement, and
Mm,
you can cancel or ruin someone's entire career if it's targeted in the right Facebook group or the right Instagram page or the right TikTok. So much of my practice now is assessing like social media feuds and how a person's being depicted by, he sexual assault allegations or,
right.
I mean, lots of different genres of
Wow.
defamation that we handle.
Incredible. No, it's a fascinating field. That's why I was very kind of going into this very stoked to ask you all about it. So let me ask you, in terms of maybe more of the, the issues to come, the issues looming. You started on that with AI. Is there any sort of, I don't know, event horizon that you sort of foresee? Everyone's making predictions with respect to AI and how it applies to the trucking industry for automated cars. How servers are, perhaps going to be obsolete in terms of, robots delivering food to our tables. There's all these industries that, predictions are for how they're going to change, be obsolete. How do you see sort of any looming issues that you might have an insight on, either affecting, the legal industry specifically, or even society at large, that you might have an insight into that others perhaps don't?
I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I would just say that to be a successful attorney, you can't shy away from advancements in technology. I think you might replace or eliminate some jobs, but you'll create new ones. I think the next best job is like the legal prompter. How do you talk to AI to get the output you want? That becomes a new
Mhm.
skill set that didn't exist. I mean, in
Right.
the course of my 20 years, the term social media manager, that wasn't a job. Now
Hmm.
that's a job. Like
Right.
when
At a law
marketing
firm,
went
right.
all into like right, or like when marketing moved from traditional media, then the dollars were spent on social media. And then you needed someone to manage in real time a negative statement or a consumer complaint. So suddenly an entire new career was born, social media
Hmm.
manager. So I think, AI is going to be the next frontier. And if you're smart, you will adopt it and incorporate it into your practice. You will become more streamlined and a new job will appear that's managing the AI outputs or packaging the AI information. I think I'm very okay with the advancements in technology, embrace them, and I think everyone should.
Well, I think that's a very healthy attitude to have because I think, like we said, the legal industry can at times be composed of, let's just say, a very, conservative sort of model of thought. And,
Right.
there are certainly are, again, to use the term dinosaurs, people that are have this longing, this nostalgic longing for the way things were instead of leaning into the way things will be or perhaps even are. And yeah, I think that's very, regardless of the merits of what's, ideal, if it is what it is, you either adapt and you lean into it or you don't.
Right.
It's almost a silly, silly debate to have.
Yes.
So let's switch gears to kind of talk more on the business side of it. I'm very interested on how would you sort of, lawyers kind of have an idea, they should at least, as to their target audience, their typical clients, their prototypical ideal customer, if you will. How would you sort of describe that? Because obviously you cover the gamut, but there are probably different pockets. How would you sort of describe that with your
Well,
field?
my tagline for a long time was representing creative entrepreneurs and innovative business organizations. That was my target, and I had a niche. I wasn't going to do your divorce. I wasn't going to do your personal injury. I was not a one-stop shop. So I had a very specific practice area and focus, and led with that. And
Right.
and actually, a big part of my practice was built on me speaking to various organizations that aligned with my interests and who I wanted as as a target audience. So I became a regular speaker to film and arts organizations, creative organizations. I mentioned the social media.
Mm-hmm.
I created a PowerPoint that I put on SlideShare, which I don't know if it's still a thing. It was called The Legal Implications of Social Media. And then an entire second career as a public speaker was born from that post because I was several different organizations reached out and asked me to speak on the topic. And so I found myself going as far as China to speak to
Wow.
it was an International Airlines Association. And ironically, I couldn't access Facebook or YouTube in China to talk about it because it's banned. Yeah, I mean, pick your place. And then I am a regular speaker at a entertainment law conference that is held every November in a different lovely overseas location. And then I spoke to like an internal auditors, or I mean, I've spoken to NASA, I've spoken to the New York Porn Film Festival. So it's taken me a lot of interesting places, and it's introduced me to a lot of interesting people that the
I can
speaking did
imagine.
on the side.
Wow. So there is that sort of organic growth that comes of it, but you also were, very laser focused, and you used the term that I honestly don't hear lawyers speak of a lot, which is niche. They speak in terms of practice area, and I think a lot of lawyers equate the two and almost kind of, don't formulate a niche because the answer to that proposed hypothetical question is yes, that's what I do. I do X, as in the practice area. And it's not a niche. You went that step further, and in the beginning you kind of talked about this scrappy, bootstrappy type of young gun in the early days, but you became very strategic. It sounds like
Yeah.
in terms of taking these skill sets in these practice areas, this command of unique knowledge, and not just being lazy in the sense of I have this unique knowledge, but then formulating a unique niche to apply that unique knowledge to.
We try. That's what I've tried. And the firm is 20 years old this year. And so we've been organically growing. I think I've spent, uh, nominal dollars on formal advertising. So it's all really been organic word of mouth growth. And that withstands any you can't buy that through SEO. You can't, if my website, God forbid, died tomorrow, I think my referral source from the network I have would still keep the firm alive. And I don't think it's important. I think it's important not to be wholly reliant on one source of clients, to build that reputation amongst different communities so you're not wholly reliant on one client source.
That is a very powerful observation that you basically, your work itself has created the networks where you're not exclusively relying on a handful of referral sources. And I
Correct.
think a lot of lawyers, when they think of referral sources being the backbone of their cases, of incoming, caseload, is that, new leads, et cetera, is they think a little more restrictively in terms of, a more limited
Right.
subset. And yours sounds like it's a lot more of a widespread net because you mentioned there were communities as opposed to just individual relationships.
Correct. Yes.
That's very powerful because I think a lot of times lawyers, when they think of a community, it's their clients, right? Like they have a client base. The clients generally, you hope, are satisfied with your services. If you did a good job, they spread the word. Fantastic. In your case, it's not just select individual relationships. You've literally enmeshed yourself into communities that is a lot more stable, because that's the downside typically of referral business,
Right.
is that the stability is perhaps not as
And that's
predictable,
why,
trackable.
and that's why being a part of these different groups is a wonderful thing because you have a group advocating for you, or you give a presentation to a group, so you're already given some, a platform.
Hmm.
People don't have to vet you. They're like, oh, if this group thinks you're good enough to come speak to us, then you must have been vetted by somebody else already.
Amazing. Now that's golden advice here, because I think a lot of times lawyers are in the crosshairs of trying to figure out the old-fashioned way, which is to just, do a good job, hope that the reputation speaks for itself, and the more modern methods, which are much more trackable, linear, direct through more digital mechanisms. You mentioned SEO, whether it's digital marketing, whether it's buying leads, whether it's
Which are good too. Like you should be part of the entire package. But
sure,
I don't think, if my website died tomorrow, I don't want to be like, completely freaking out. I would be freaking
right.
out, but I don't want my whole firm won't die.
Naturally. Right. No, I think that you're it's that diversification of that inbound traffic, and even in the referral column, that diversification seems pretty wide in your case. So that's very, and that is not something that somebody can just sort of apply. They have to develop that and do that,
It takes 20
do the
years.
work.
Yeah, it takes 20
Right.
years. I mean, I wasn't where I am now. And look, I've become lazier about going to events and shaking hands and kissing babies because the phone rings, because I've been around long enough.
Right.
But in the very beginning, that's all I did every night. I went to something every night.
What would you say are some of the struggles that you faced, some of the challenges that, whether they're individual to you or something that you could see replicative that other lawyers are or would face, that you could sort of, share and explain how you conquered them?
I think it's a challenge is managing workload. I'll say my cases are higher stakes. And so when I was first starting out, I had a lot of cases, but like nothing was, bet the farm, like whatever, the pick your cliche of choice.
Right.
Now I'd say like people are coming to me with really high stakes cases where there's millions of dollars at stake or the entire business is at stake. And so that becomes more stressful. The firm is the same. I have great people who work with me, but you kind of, you're a little more nervous handling something like that than you might be.
Sure.
But that's just managing the client and the case. I don't know if that's just part of growing up as a law firm and having those kinds of clients.
Right.
What else I would say?
Good problems to have.
Yeah. All the small business stuff, right? Like marketing, hiring someone good, keeping them, making sure the firm culture is good, choosing the right vendors, finding the right processes, making sure, we're maximizing tools we have to make more efficient, like our trade. I mean, I've spent a lot of time and energy in our trademark filing process. We have lots of different docketing software. We have intake forms. We're able to streamline that process, and that took time. We have decided, like, not wasting time on consultations, especially because of the practice areas. I would spend so much time on free consults, and I got to a point where that's not sustainable, and I need to vet clients who can pay for our services and who actually have a case. And even if they don't, I've saved them a lot of money with their initial consult to not pursue further.
Right.
Cases. So we started charging for our consults, and we created an intake form, and we created a whole, like, watch this video before you call me so that you don't waste your money or your time. Those are the things I've developed over 20 years of practices, is streamlining and making processes better. And then always the traditional, all small businesses problems, like keeping the project management and the employees and the market, all the things.
Right. As you're, looking at the rest of your career to come, do you see, especially since you're in such an impactful field that is so cutting edge, so, ever elastic and changing, do you ever think about sort of a legacy that you'd like to accomplish, or do you see it as a new battleground or forefront that you'd like to be in the sway of, or like to have sort of some lasting legacy upon? Does that thought, again, especially with the way tech is so abundant, so far reaching, what would be sort of your, I guess, just to use the word legacy, that you would sort of shoot to achieve?
I think my legacy is already being developed or created. I mean, I took one of the first, I'd say my legacy is already kind of, I don't say built or done, but each case that's new and novel is one of my legacy cases. I took a case to the Illinois Supreme Court involving catfishing. It got nationwide and international recognition. That was one of the only cases of its kind that I know of in the country. I just secured a $4.5 million judgment after a jury trial in a case involving cyber harassment, and the weapon of choice was fake Yelp reviews and a website using my client's name, where a lot of terrible things were said. So I don't think I'm like gonna close up shop and this is what I hope packaged my legacy to be. I think over time there's been really fun and different, interesting things that I've worked on or have been associated with. That is the legacy.
Right. That's an outstanding answer. That's it's inspirational, and from here on, it's just you've built that massive snowball, and it just kind of keeps rolling and rolling, and
Yeah, I
you're
hope.
you're clearly enjoying that ride. I mean, it sounds like it covers all corners. The work part, the social part, the enmeshing in
Absolutely.
those communities. It kind of all circles together where you're clearly having fun. The way you're speaking about it, you're
Right.
enjoying the ride, you're enjoying the wins, you're enjoying the challenges, the lessons, the ability to continually evolve. You look at that as your lifeblood instead of an annoying
Well, like I
mountain to
don't like
climb.
my husband jokes, he's like, you don't have any hobbies. I'm like, I don't, because like my hobby is my law firm. Like I go to events, I have my social, like I get the social interaction I need besides our
Right.
regular stuff. But like I get a lot of exactly what you said. I get a lot of what I need from the firm. I meet interesting people. I work on interesting cases. I get to go to interesting places.
Outstanding. Well, when people consider as lawyers how to build their practice, their life, all of the above, I mean, to have them synergized and firing on all cylinders, and we
Yeah.
use the word work-life balance a lot, but not just work-life balance, but work-life alignment.
Right.
Sounds like you just, you're really, knocked it out of the
You
park.
have to
So,
like what you do. Like, don't go be a lawyer to process. I don't want to again disparage another practice area, but don't be a lawyer because you think that's what you should do, and then just
mhm.
trudge through the paperwork all day. Like, you should at least have some interest in the things you're reading all day. Now, is all my life exciting? Do I have to read tedious things? Of course, but as a whole, it's part of the package.
Outstanding. That's a great place. I think we're gonna, let that message, resonate. It's been an amazing pleasure hearing about your practice, hearing about your life, and how they're so enmeshed and interwoven, and so interwoven with everybody's lives. Again, this is the stuff that touches all corners. This is what's affecting people on the day-to-day basis, and in exciting and interesting ways. So, this is a really great conversation. Happy to hear you, share all of these details, and really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thanks again for having me on. Can't wait to see the
Thank you,
final
Dahlia.
output. Yeah,
Love it. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. And we ended at
Yep, I was
3:45.
trying to be cognizant of that,
That was
right on
very
track.
well done. Well done. Like keeping the pace. Good
That's
job.
right. No, thank you so much. I'm really glad, obviously, that the tech worked, but I knew it would be
Yeah.
a great convo, and it was you know, exactly what I was expecting. I'll let you run now. I know you got to cruise and clip for that train. We'll
Right.
get that out. We'll get that stuff out to you, Dahlia.
Okay.
And you guys can, disseminate it as you see fit.
Will do. Do you need me to do anything? Or are you all uploaded before I close?
You know what? The only thing would be just to kind of, I'll stop the recording.